I'm Lucy Hodge, and I'm a learning designer and solutions consultant with Walkgrove, and I'm here to talk to you about diagnostic assessments and specifically how you can use them to really make the most of assessments going forward. Just before we start, a couple of things. You'll notice as we go through it, the slides are quite dense, quite a bit of text. They will be available afterwards, and they're available free from Walkgrove's website. And to supplement that, I've also written a white paper on the topic, which again goes into more detail, and that's also freely available on Walkgrove's website. So at any time, if there's anything you think, oh, she hasn't covered that enough, then you're free to go there. Okay, so here's what I'll be covering today. Start off by defining diagnostic assessments. Well, I'm sure lots of you will know what they are. There may be a few of you who aren't quite sure. There are benefits to learners, instructors and organisations. Again, that's something that might not always be focused on when we're looking at diagnostic assessments, so that's again something we'll go through. I'll then look at some tips on how to think about writing a good, effective diagnostic assessment. One thing to bear in mind is that there's no right answer to any of this. It will really depend on your needs, the client's needs, the learner's needs. So again, everything is completely up to you. And these are really, I'll just be posing some questions for you to think about, which I'll talk about in some more detail. And finally, we'll look at how you can use diagnostic assessments for course personalisation. That's one of the key benefits that you can have for learners, and so I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. Okay, to start off, what are diagnostic assessments and how are they different to other types of assessments? Well, there are technically lots of different assessment types, but the three that are most common and which I'll focus on most are diagnostic assessments, formative assessments and summative assessments. Those go in order, so first of all, before you start the course, something that's got nothing to do with what somebody's learned during a course is the diagnostic assessment, and that's my primary focus today. That looks at what the learner's already learned, what they already know from other experiences, maybe from other roles they've had. They could be a new starter. You may have had no influence in their past training. So the diagnostic assessments helps you get a real picture of where they are. A formative assessment, something you don't use so much in e-learning, but you may do in a blended learning course. What that is assessments as you go on that can then be used to shape the course as it progresses. Again, with e-learning that might not be possible, but if you are using e-learning as part of a blended solution with face-to-face options, that can be something you can take part in. But again, that won't be quite the focus. Finally, something which all of you are very likely to be familiar with are summative assessments. They come at the end of the course. They're your standard end of course assessments that will have a look at what you've just learnt and test you on what knowledge you've gained from the course, or in some instances, knowledge you've had previously. So again, you'll find out where the learner stands at the end of the course. Again, as I said, summative assessments are the most common. You'll be most familiar with those. Diagnostic assessments, quite a lot of clients do ask us for that, so it is something that we're getting more and more requests for. But again, it's something that I think some people don't understand perhaps as much as they could do. Diagnostic and formative assessments, they've got a really great feature, which is that you can tailor courses, personalised courses, dependent on the assessment results. And as I said, that's something I'll go into a bit more detail later. Okay, so as I said, diagnostic assessments benefit different groups in different ways, so I'll go through these step by step. For learners, there are some really great benefits, and again, lots of these will depend on how you use a diagnostic assessment. But generally, at the very simplest level, what a diagnostic assessment allows learners to do is get a really good picture of what knowledge they already have. People aren't always that great at understanding what they know and what they don't know. People may have too much confidence in their own knowledge. Other people might think they don't know very much, but actually they've got a really good grasp of it, and I'm sure you'll all know people who fall into both categories. What a diagnostic assessment does is lets learners see exactly where they stand on the knowledge before they start the course. Again, that helps them know what they should focus on as they go through. If they start a diagnostic assessment and they get 90%, they can feel pretty confident, but they can look at that 10% and say, oh, actually, this is an area that I should really brush up on. On the other hand, if they've only got 30%, it might well be that they'll see, oh, hang on, I don't know much about this as I thought I did, so actually I'll focus quite a lot on these sections. Something it allows to do, as I said, I'll talk about later, is having the opportunity to follow a personalised learning path. I've talked just about the most simple option, whereas people see what their results are, find out what areas they're not so great at, and then choose to focus on things themselves. However, there may be more sophisticated opportunities for people to actually follow a personalised learning path. Again, depending on the organisation, and particularly in further education or with CPD, there's the opportunity to actually receive credits for knowledge that you already have. You may start a new role, you start with a diagnostic assessment, and it turns out actually you've got pretty good skill levels. You may be able to start a higher level of training than you would if you'd gone to there and found out actually you really needed to upskill in quite a few areas. For instructors, which is essentially what I am, I find it really helpful because it helps me understand how much the learners know myself. It may be that people come from an organisation and they're pretty well trained in a variety of areas, but not one specific area. What that means is when I'm designing courses, I can actually focus on that. And it's something that works the same for shaping future courses. If you go through and you see, actually, within this organisation, within this group of learners, there is a particular weakness in this area. What that means is when I'm designing courses in future or tailoring them, so people have gone through them a few times, I can then go and say, well actually when they came into this course, these are the areas that people in general struggled with. So these are the areas that I can focus on more. And that's what I want to do because I want to get the most out of things so learners really can learn. And finally, I want learners to enjoy themselves when they're doing their course. I don't want them to go through and think, well, this isn't relevant to me. I already know all this. So actually using diagnostic assessment helps me offer a more tailored experience for learners. It improves their engagement, it improves their motivation. And again, that's just a good thing all round because I want people to actually learn from what I'm doing. And finally, organisations. It's not just learner and instructor centric. So organisations, they have the opportunity to actually look at the return on investment for a particular course. Something that people often do is at the end of a course, they'll just have their assessments and use that to measure the return on investment. But how much did the learners already know coming into it? If the learners already had a very high level of knowledge, it might be that the training initiative actually didn't have that much of a high impact. Maybe something better could have been done that focused on different areas. So if you find that there's very little change in knowledge over a course, that lets you go back and say, actually the return on investment for this wasn't as good as it could be. Let's have a look and do some more training needs analysis and actually find the areas where we really can get some return on investment. And again, it helps review the existing knowledge of people who are new to role. It can be used to shape the work supports and personal development plans. Again, you want to maximise your work people's time on actually doing their jobs, not on training that they don't need to do. So if you're able to use a diagnostic assessment and say, well actually they're already really strong on these areas, you can then plan their development later and really focus in on the things that need to be looked at. So, as I said, there is no single way to design an effective diagnostic assessment. Everybody's different, all learners are different, all organisations are different, subject matter is different, so there is no one answer. So what I'm going to do is look at some really core questions to ask yourselves. Is a diagnostic assessment right for me? How should I go about it? How many questions do I need? What am I going to do with it? So I'll have a quick look at that. To start off, I think this is the absolute key question you need to start off with. How do you plan to use the assessment? I've recently been in meetings with clients who've said we'd like a diagnostic assessment. So I say, okay, great, what do you want to do with it? And they say, I'm not really sure. And of course, what you want to do with your diagnostic assessment will really affect how it will look. Do you want to measure return on investment? If you do, you might want something a bit more sophisticated. Is it something that's really just for the learner to look at themselves and plan their own journey, for them to really use it as a personal self-assessment? Again, that will have an impact on what you do. Next, how much time and money do you want to invest? Like everything else, creating a diagnostic assessment takes time and money, not just to build and organise, but also to analyse. If you're going to be looking at the results, who have you got to do that? How much time do you have? What are you actually going to do with these results? Is it in fact something where you think, I don't really have that time, I don't really have that budget, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with it? In that case, go back to your instructional designer or your learning designer, or yourself if you're the in-house designer, and say, okay, what am I using it for? How much budget can I afford? What can I do with this? If you get a lot of detailed information, which you might do, analysis can take a lot of time. Again, it can be really valuable, but that is something you have to bear in mind. And again, what are you using it for? If you're measuring the effectiveness of the training, you need to make sure your pre-assessment and post-assessment match. So really those two need to be written in collaboration. Diagnostic assessments can be great to work with your existing post-assessments, your existing summative assessments, to really just add that value so that you can measure the effectiveness of the training. And again, will you use the results to guide later training initiatives? If you're really going to be using it for that, then you might want to invest more time and money, because you're then going to be using this information going forward to improve your course. And so again, it's really a balancing act. What do you want to invest? And again, how is your course going to be delivered? Is it going to be online only, or is it part of a blended solution, or is it in fact just a training solution that's done face-to-face? If you've got an online course, you may have fewer options, perhaps because of technical limitations. You may not have as many opportunities for personalisation, whereas if you're actually looking at something that's a blended solution with perhaps an online pre-assessment, then you can go into there, having looked at the results, and tailor your offering to the students there. How much content do you have? I've been asked to do diagnostic assessments for a 10-minute course before. It may not be the most effective use of time and budget. So really, if you've got not very much content, is a diagnostic assessment really going to show you what you need it to show? Or in fact, is it just going to make the learner think, well, that was a bit of a waste of time moving through the course? On the other hand, for really long courses, you need to make sure you've covered every learning point, just as you do with your end of course assessments. You need to make sure that if it's an important topic that needs to be learned, you have to cover that with your diagnostic assessment. So again, they need to be, they may need to be quite a bit longer, more substantial. You may want to cover learning points multiple times. So again, that's something to think about. Look at the length of your course. Is this something I've got the money for? Will it be effective? Now this is a good one. Does the learning have to tick a regulatory box? Sometimes people say, well, actually everybody's got to complete the whole course. There's no flexibility. They've got to do the whole thing from start to finish. Okay, then again, what is your reason for using the diagnostic assessment? If again it's for return on investment, and if it's to measure knowledge gain, then absolutely that can still be valuable. But you may not have the opportunity to offer a personalised learning path. It may be that everybody still has to go through everything if there's a regulatory need. Again, flexibility. It's the same with mandatory courses. Does everybody need to know everything that's in the course? Must it be shown that they've read it all? If the answer is yes, again, course personalisation may be difficult. So that's something to think about when you go forward with it. So really bear those in mind. Another one, how rigorous should the assessment be? Again, I've sometimes been asked to do diagnostic assessments. They're actually really more to comfort the learner and encourage them. They aren't necessarily to highlight any weaknesses, and they aren't really useful for return on investment. What they're there for is to give the learner confidence before they start the course. Again, that's a very valid use for it, but again, make sure you know what you're doing when you go in for that. Will they be able to skip parts of the course? Some will, some won't. May they skip the course altogether? Again, if it's a very rigorous assessment, then it may be the option, you may have the option actually, they've already got 40 out of 40, they clearly know everything, we're very happy for them to just stop now and say, them taking that course would be a waste of their time and our time, a waste of resource and money. And it may be that it's actually quite a short course. Maybe you've only got 5 questions in your diagnostic assessment. I mean, I might question the value of only 5 questions in a diagnostic assessment, but as I said, it does depend on the course length and course rigour. But for that sort of assessment, you may find that actually you don't want them to be able to skip anything at all, because it isn't particularly rigorous. So that's something to bear in mind. And again, are you actually looking back to the past? For some of the other training initiatives you've done in the past to see whether or not they're effective. Once again, it's very important to consider that for the efficiency and for the rigour of the pre-assessment. What are you doing with it? Again, these are just the key questions. As I said, all advice on creating effective assessments applies. So I'm not going into detail on that because I'm sure lots of you will know a lot about that. Again, covering all the learning points, making sure if you've got multiple choice questions that you've got good distractors. All those tools apply just as well to diagnostic assessments as they do to end of course assessments, and sometimes even more. So it's not an easy, quick job. You've actually got to put a lot of time and effort in if you want to get it right. Okay, so as I said, here are some ways that you can look at diagnostic assessment for course personalisation. I think that this is a really nice way in which you can use this, and I think it's of value to learners and organisations when you have the flexibility to do that. When you look at online-only courses, as we talked about earlier, in the simplest cases, learners just find out their results. They're shown what they did well, what they did badly, and from that, they can decide themselves how much to focus on different sections. Some more sophisticated options will present a much more detailed breakdown with a learning path sketched out that says, we recommend you look at this, this, and this. Again, depending on the sophistication of your budget. Finally, it can also be that you actually have a dynamic learning path that's actually generated by the results of the diagnostic assessment. And again, that's something which, if you have the capability, I think that can be a great thing. In which topics are actually presented to the learner, what things open up, maybe different levels of knowledge. So if somebody's done perhaps not so well in one section, they may be presented with more information at a base level. Whereas if somebody's done very well, they could be directed to further resources and support that way, rather than having to go through what are the basics. With blended courses, you actually have a little bit more flexibility, because instructors, as we said earlier, can review the results of the diagnostic assessments beforehand. They can look at patterns, they can see what should come in the future, how do I need to change this and tailor this, once again, for the audience that I have. It also provides an opportunity to find time for coaching initiatives. If you go through and there's a particular learner who hasn't done quite as well, you can say, okay, here are your problem areas, this is what I think would really work for you, and add that additional support. So again, it's very much learner focused. Just very briefly, because I know we want to keep this to time, just a couple of brief case studies for things that Walkgrove are working on at the moment. So the first one is the Transport for London package. We've done quite a lot of work for Transport for London. This is particularly aimed at white van drivers, of which 7,000 more will be on the roads because of the Crossroad project. And TfL have identified that people are having problems with coming in, their MOT certificates are out of date, general roadworthiness isn't great. And the question is this because they don't have the knowledge, or is this behavioural? And so one of the important things is to look at what knowledge level they have when they come into the course. So that's the primary reason to have the pre-assessment there. So they can say, well, are these mistakes actually being made because they don't really know what's going on? And so then it can be looked at across the course. By the end of the course, how do the results measure up? And then going forward, as part of a wider return on investment initiative, what that means is that TfL could look at that and say, well, has this reduced the number of incidents that we've had? Has this improved the quality? And so on. Another one that we've done is for the post office. This is very different. This is aimed at managers with essential managerial skills. And the diagnostic assessment is it's partly a self-assessment and it's partly a diagnostic assessment. Part of the self-assessment, it asks people to rate their confidence levels at the start, so that's paired with the actual knowledge-based questions. And it generates, as we were saying, a fully personalised learning profile. And again, what that means is that the managers who already have pretty good skills and good high levels of confidence in particular areas can go through and say, okay, well, I don't need to do that. Whereas people who perhaps are new to role, don't have as much confidence, can go through and say, okay, right, we need to figure out all those areas. And that has the summative assessment, which uses the same technique. So again, has your confidence increased? And again, measures the knowledge gain. So finally, just to sum up now, diagnostic assessments, not everybody uses them. I think more people should, because I think they've got great benefits, particularly for learners and for instructions, and again for the organisation. Happy learners are more willing to engage, they're more willing to learn, we get better outcomes. If people don't need to spend as long on training exercises because actually they already know it, then that's good for them and it's good for an organisation. Before you put a diagnostic assessment in though, make sure you think about it carefully. What are you using it for? Don't just go and say, well, I'd like a diagnostic assessment, I've heard that it's good. You need to go through and say, well, actually, I'm using this for return on investment, or I'm using it for course personalisation, or I'm using it so that learners can find out their level of knowledge beforehand. Or it could be a combination of all of them. So again, that will shape their design, that will shape their use, you'll think about your content. It's really just focusing on those questions beforehand. Again, can't be emphasised enough, you need to be as rigorous when writing your diagnostic assessment as you are when you're writing your end of course assessment. It's important if you want to use it for anything other than perhaps just boosting somebody's confidence before they start the course. Otherwise, all the same information applies. Make sure you keep that as rigorous as possible. And finally, personalisation. Great way to personalise your course, gain learner trust, gain learner excitement, enjoyment, gain time for organisation, improves learner motivation, improves the outcomes, and that's really what we're wanting. Okay, so does anybody have any questions? Thanks for listening through all that. Well, obviously I covered it sufficiently. Anything? Oh, no. Okay, well I'll be around afterwards for any questions, and I'll just be over at the Walkgrove stand for the rest of the afternoon, just behind you there, if you've got anything you'd like to talk to me about or talk to the program about. Thank you very much.